Okay, good morning. No? Welcome po sa lahat sa ating Black Friday webinar. Pasensya may aso. Today, no, pag-uusapan natin free expression under the anti-terror law. Bale, as we know, may around 25 petitions na against it today. As of today, and this morning and this afternoon, may magpa-file pang dalawa. Siguro before we start the discussion, no, gusto ko lang din sabihin na wala naman po sa atin na for terror. No? I mean, yun yung isang malaking argument online and from government officials na if you're against the anti-terror law, then you must be for terrorism. Specifically, ngayon pag-usapan natin, freedom of expression, parang how this law could affect journalists and artists. I mean, clearly, hindi naman sila terrorists, no? Hindi rin naman sila, sabihin nating, nasa front lines of that struggle. But nga pala, sorry. So today with us is Miss Glenda Gloria, managing editor and founder, one of the founders of Rappler. Also Miss Lisa Ito, Secretary General of the Concerned Artists of the Philippines. So tatanungin natin sila ngayon, parang clearly, hindi naman masasabi na terrorists and journalists and artists. And yet, kasama sila sa petitioners against this law. Siguro briefly lang, Ma'am Glenda, could you tell us parang what are the dangers that this law poses to journalists? I mean, why are we opposing it?
Hi, magandang umaga. Thank you for this invite. Siguro, bago ko talakayin yung specific dangers, no, I think it's very important for us na isipin yung konteksto within which yung environment that led to this passing of the law, and the environment that also triggered an unprecedented filing of counter petitions. So as of last count, as you mentioned this morning, that would be the 26th petition against the law. So nakakatuwa dahil not in my lifetime as a journalist have I seen a law that has been under attack in the same way that this is being attacked. So unang-una yon. Tapos siguro yung konteksto din ng yung paghain ng journalists, for example, along with even politicians and human rights activists, kita mo na across the board yung dagok, yung tingin natin na disadvantage ng batas. So it's not just a question of freedom of expression, but also a question of democracy. So I think yung specific dangers are a bit less relevant than the overall danger that this law is actually exposing us to, which is parang I would liken it to parang isang sundalo ka na, armado ka na, you have the best and the most modern weapons in the world, bibigyan ka pa ng nuclear weapon. Yung batas parang will nuke it out it's a nuke na wala na yan. So it's like a bomb that is waiting to explode. So yun lang. So I guess it's important for us lang na not to, yes, the details are important, the specific dangers are important, but the overarching issue here is the law is another blow to an already dying democracy.
I'd like to ask then, Ma'am Lisa, no? As artists po, why are you opposed to the anti-terrorism law?
Sa artists din po, like journalists and media workers, yung very broad definition of how it views terrorism, nakikita po namin na threat siya to freedom of expression, which is very important for artistic practice and creativity to happen. Tulad po na sabi ni Ma'am Glenda, the specifics, it's secondary to the overarching threat that it poses, and the way that it defines terrorism so broadly, covered niya not just ang lawak po ng sakop niya, and it covers even the intent and association or purported association. It really widens the scope to to cover things that even ordinary people and citizens such as artists and cultural workers are doing. Section 9 halimbawa, inciting to yung even the act of inciting or intention is included. So kung syempre sa trabaho po ng mga sa practice and trabaho ng mga artists, a lot of it is inciting. Tulad po ng sinabi sa isang petition, no? A lot of what artists do, di ba? Is not to keep silent and not to just say good things. It's also saying the things that need to be said, and this can be very well misconstrued as inciting. Kaya the way it defines it really is a threat. Tapos second po, it's not yung even before this, mahaba na po yung history of threats and attacks against artists and cultural workers in the same way that media workers have been attacked during the various years. So nakikita namin these attacks will continue, and these range from not just red tagging but also trumped up charges, illegal arrests, and killings. All of that happened din po sa artists during the past 3 years. So, and all of these were under the purported assumption na terorista o rebelde yung ginagawa, rebellion yung ginagawa ng mga cultural workers na to. So, even before this law was passed, marami na pong attacks which are happening. And there is a basis to say that if the law is implemented, this will worsen and more people will be affected, including us.
Okay. Nabanggit kanina na democracy is dying, democracy is under threat. Parang this petition kasi may undercurrent din na, or parang may sentiment na sasabi, oh, we have too much democracy, we have too much freedom. Parang ginagamit daw yung freedom to quote-unquote siraan yung gobyerno. Parang, ano po yung take nyo on this? Or why is this, why is dissent not necessarily just parang trying to bring down the government or anything? Why is it healthy for a democracy, for example?
Siguro hindi lang, dissent is not just healthy for democracy, it is a necessary ingredient for democracy. Kasi without dissent, without contrary opinion, then the public, or Filipinos for that matter, will have no informed decision. Kasi kaya nga sinasabi ng journalism is the fourth estate. Dahil yung kapangyarihan ng gobyerno, and especially in this form of government, a presidential form of government, talagang malakas, and therefore power needs not only to be accountable, but to be held accountable every single day. And sa environment ng pandemic, mas lalo na, 'di ba? Kasi maraming pera maraming utang at maraming namamatay at maraming processes na nag-i-impact sa kabuhayan at kalusugan ng tao. So, parang wala sa timing yung anti-terror. And dissent and contrary opinion or even protest for that matter, kailangan yon. Kung hindi, talagang matatawag natin na mapapariwara kung sino man ang in power. That's the nature of democracy. And last I heard, we're supposed to be a democratic government and society.
Ma'am Lisa?
Yung freedom of expression, mahalaga siya for things to get better and for things to improve. Kung ang pagtingin po nila sa kritisismo ay kabawasan sa kanilang pagkatao, ganyan, at mapipikon lang sila at resbakin lang nila lahat ng mga critics, hindi magkakaroon ng check and balance po sa ating society. I mean, people, citizens, use freedom of expression to criticize, to protest. Yung dissent is in that context, di ba? Sinasabi natin kung ano yung napupunan natin na mali sa gobyerno dahil ramdam natin yung effects. Artists kasama dun kasi marami po talagang nawalan ng trabaho under the pandemic at marami talagang walang secure na kabuhayan. So many people are really speaking out about our situation and on behalf of yung nakikita natin sa society who are marginalized, like the jeepney drivers, indigenous peoples, the workers, tsaka yung mga magsasaka. So artists and cultural workers, we use our voice to to mirror those realities and to say na this is what's happening. So kung titingnan yung ganitong klaseng exercises of freedom of expression as something that's related to terrorism, at kung tayo ay ipa-persecute for that, that's not a healthy sign of, that's not a democracy anymore, clearly, no? Yung freedom of expression, freedom of the press, yung right natin to information, lahat po to crucial tools and rights in the battle against COVID-19. And actually, marami sa mga check and balances nangyayari kapag malakas yung protest sa isang society. Pag nagsalita yung halimbawa yung images that we have that are produced in the context of protest or documenting the rights violations that are happening in society, malakas po yung impact talaga nila to make people aware of what's happening and how rights should be protected. Halimbawa, yung photograph ni Rappler of years back when the EJKs were starting, that was a very big catalyst for really bringing home the point na hindi na po tama yung nangyayari. That's the power of art as criticism and as a form of documentation pa nga siya kasi it appeared in a publication, di ba? So if these expressions fall under the very broad range of acts inciting to commit terrorism, that doesn't really spell, that's not a good sign for our society po. Ayun.
Mm-hmm. Isa sa mga sinasabi no about this law and in general no yung chilling effect, Malacanang and other parang columnists have said na wala namang ganon. Could we talk briefly about what the chilling effect is and yun basically anong effect niya sa atin as a society or saan siya galing then also?
Siguro I'll just cite one aspect of the law that worsens the so-called chilling effect. Kasi let it be said na even before this law was passed, there was already a chilling effect of all the executive actions made by this government against media, the shutdown of ABS, the continuous harassment of provincial journalists, diba? The raids of activist offices, etc. So, hindi bago yung climate of fear. Ano lang to, parang new wave lang because of the law. Pero specific dun sa surveillance, for example. Diba? The law allows surveillance for 60 days. Of course, an account of a court order, sort of. I mean, the law presumes two things, presumes and assumes two things that are not realistic. First, it assumes that there is no surveillance going on without a court order. I mean, anong bansa ang pinag-uusapan natin? May surveillance. Surveillance has been there without court orders. That's the reality. Journalists have been under surveillance. I personally, even before the Duterte government, I've been under, you assume that you're under surveillance. So the law assumes that there is no surveillance going on and that it needs a court order and that you have to allow the authorities to do a surveillance. They do not need the law to do surveillance now. They do it, blatantly violating our basic rights. So there's that. Also, the law assumes and presumes that you have a professional and competent intelligence community that could gather intelligent information that's vetted rigorously, that is not tainted by politics or vested interest. That assumes and presumes that that's the reality. Hindi ganun. Ang intelligence community natin, hindi lang sa panahon ng Duterte government, in previous governments has always been used by leaders to further their political interests. There is a group of intelligence people and units who are professional, but that's not the norm now. That's not the dominant discipline, I think, now. And so, lalagyan mo pa ng batas ng ganon, parang lokohan Parang alam naman natin na nagagamit ang intelligence sa maski ano. And classic example mo, yung Matrix na umabot kay Panelo at pinakita niya na buong media and yung JP Rappler kasama sa plot to destabilize the government. So, maski yun lang sa punto na yon, talagang very parang wala sa realidad yung batas.
Yung chilling effect po, naramdaman po namin yun. Even before, ramdam na po siya. Pero when news of how the terror law was being railroaded, nung minamadali na ng Kongreso na ipasa ito, hanggang sa i-certify ng President na urgent bill, hanggang sa i-sign niya into law 5 days before maglalapse to. Doon sa period po na yon, in the span of 1 month, just a few weeks po, ramdam sa artist community may galit talaga, may outrage dahil madaling maunawaan at ng community kung bakit napaka-problematic, bakit threat ang law na ito. Pero at the same time, kapag nakikipag-webinar sa mga webinars, sa mga different activities, ramdam din yung chilling effect in the form of the questions that are being asked. You ask people to sign a petition, a manifesto for instance, public manifesto, yung mga change.org online, maraming magsasign, pero meron din magtatanong, paano yung security namin kapag pumirma ako dito, yung sa pangalan ko, natitrace ba yan? May ganun, that's digital, ramdam po yan sa public manifestos. Dito po sa legal petition na final, meron din pong ganung pag-aalilinlangan na pipirma ba ako dito, tataya ba ako dito. Pero yung nakakatuwa po is maraming artists, culture workers, media workers talagang tumaya at nanindigan. No? Despite the fear, nag-step forward and we find ways to reinforce and help each other overcome that fear. Yun nga po yung medyo nakakatakot din sa kung hahayaan lang yung law na to take effect, kasi the impacts on us are not just in the realm of the law but on a very personal level, no? It builds it causes kapag ayaw mo magsalita, self-censorship yan eh. And self-censorship, na-practice siya in different ways, no? In our use of social media, sa mga artists and cultural workers, may impact yan on how we produce our works or what kind of works do we produce. Kasi pwede kang mag-produce, gumawa ng very matapang na trabaho, pwede ka rin gumawa ng trabaho na medyo mas symbolic, pero pa rin, may mensahe pa rin na relevant at may critique, pero mag-iiba yung how we respond creatively based on how people deal with that chilling effect and the threat of self-censorship. Ito po yung nakakagalit doon kasi these are constitutionally guaranteed rights, di ba? Yung freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of association, all of these, we should not feel the pressure to self-censor because the Constitution guarantees or is supposed to guarantee these rights. And yun yung at stake po dito. A lot of people before fought to have these phrases in our Constitution. After the fall of the dictatorship, in Constitutional Commission, these phrases of free speech, free expression, pinaglaban po yan ng mga nandun sa Constitutional Commission. Nababanggit po lagi ng mga ibang generations ng CAP members how Lino Broca, yung filmmaker na si Lino Broca, a national artist, he was a member of the Constitutional Commission before, and he really fought to have the phrase freedom of expression included sa current na saligang batas natin. So, yung tinatreaten po niya, it's not just something which is present, but a history of rights which we fought for as a people. Kaya this chilling effect, we really must deal with this po. Ayun. And from yung nakikita ko po, many people are from the community are um, finding ways to deal with that chilling effect. Whether that's organizing among ourselves to para pag-aralan yung batas, ano ba yung mga pwedeng gawin, yung know your rights, digital security, all of these things that we are trying to do right now to face the law and to fight back against this chilling effect. Nangyayari po yan. And the petition is one of those ways po. Yun.
So one of the proposals din no, from the AFP naman, although hindi pa naman siya naipapasok sa implementing rules, no, is to regulate social media na for now parang yun na yung pinaka freest ano natin di ba? Na parang freest landscape natin, no. They say na yun daw isa daw to sa parang isang proof to na grabe yung overreach nitong anti-terrorism law, no. Ano yung possible effect niya if they say, oh sige, let's regulate social media, what could be the possible form of that regulation?
Well, thankfully, I just don't know how serious the statement of the Defense Secretary is, but he actually came out yesterday with a statement practically rejecting Armed Forces Chief of Staff Gapay's statement na kasama yung social media. But sige, having said that, we'll take his word for it, but assuming that in truth, operationally, the AFP would consider social media as being part of, covered by the anti-terror law, in a way, lumalabas lang yung totoong hangarin ng mga ilan na mga right-wing commanders within the military na to use social media as an extension of the battlefield. And that is very dangerous because even the soldiers who are armed and who have the monopoly of violence, and state violence at that, are considering social media as an extension of their battlefield. And even prior to the anti-terror law, nandyan sila sa Facebook, hindi ko na sila papangalanan, nanghaharas sila ng reporter, lalo na mga base sa mga probinsya, na pinagsususpetsahan nila na kaliwang reporter, na minsan pag nainis sila sa storya, name and shame nila yung reporter. Ang nakakalimutan natin, hindi tama yon sa isang sundalo at sa isang pulis na armado. Kasi once you are armed with a weapon paid for by taxpayers, you lose privacy then what you do cannot be dissociated from what you are on social media. And napaka-dangerous na in a way, manghaharas ka sa social media at ngayon i-regulate mo siya, di ibig sabihin nun, helpless tayo, di ba? Kasi armado sila tayo naman hindi armado. Ang journalist hindi armado. Nasa imagination lang nila na kakampi tayo ng armado, pero hindi naman totoo yun. So sana wag silang pumunta doon. And I'll take the defense chief's word for it that they will not regulate social media because the business of the armed forces precisely is to regulate the conduct of their own men on social media. They should not tolerate soldiers who use social media as the extension of the battle zone.
Agree po sa sinabi ni ma'am, hindi po dapat talaga nila gamitin yung social media as the extension of that landscape of war. Yung mga military dudes, yung mga military, yung may military background in the current administration po. Nakakalungkot kasi the way they have conducted po kung paano nila na-handle yung pandemic response sa kasalukuyan, kung indikasyon po yan kung paano nila hinahandle din i-handle yung social media, that's not a good scenario po. A few days ago, halimbawa, marami po kasing artistic works and creative works na dahil pandemic ngayon at may physical distancing, maraming online po yung maraming artworks and creative productions talaga online yung nagiging daluyan halimbawa, yung mga theater plays from before, yung mga live events from before, syempre, these are actual happenings and events, but now most has shifted online. Um, Ganon din po sa mga visual artists. People are sharing their works online. Music, images, which lahat to sumasalamin dun sa nangyayari sa atin ngayon. And a lot of it is unflattering talaga to the current administration because that's the reality that we see. Yung mga artists nagpe-paint po about yung or nagpo-portray ng works about yung suffering of frontliners, nagpo-portray ng works which convey that rage and anger and frustration na nararamdaman natin. And lahat po ito ay nasa social media. Kung lahat to ay gagawin nila or parang ita-take nila as expressions of dissent, which can be criminalized, delikado po. So we need to protect those spaces po of free expression. A few days ago, naging issue po yung revolution remark ni President, di ba? Which Fox Roque attributed to this is referring to yung song na produce ng mga artists, no? Which became very popular, yung Di Nyo Ba Naririnig. It was played, a new version of that. It was a collaboration by different artists sa mainstream film and TV industry. And it was played during the Day of the SONA as a form of expression and solidarity with the call, So Nagkaisa. No? So nagkakaisa yung people at that time for health, para sa kalusugan, para sa karapatan, para sa ating kalayaan. And yun yung context kung bakit ni-release yung kanta na yun, di ba? Na ang bayan galit, kaya kailangan marinig yung boses. Pero ito ay inattribute na ito naman yung pinag-initan. That's one example of how repression on social media can go, na parang andaling ipinpoint yung mga ganitong expressions of protest and to single them out. So we must protect these, kailangan po natin protektahan at alagaan yung natitirang espasyo na ito. No? It's already subject to surveillance nga. Halimbawa, kung ganito yung nasa background ko, kung palitan ko, pakita ko ng artwork, ay, ayaw. No? Ayan, artwork po ito na kinommission ng NUJP sa CAP last December para po dun sa Ampatuan Massacre commemoration. It was an artwork. Ano po?
Kidnap ng NCRPO.
Oh yes po, yung kinonfiscate daw nila nung December 19 na hindi pa nila sinasoli. Ayun. Ito, nasa kanila to physically, pero kung online, ipalabas namin, i-post natin ito, or pinag-uusapan to, or pinag-uusapan yung issues around this online, paano nila titingnan or paano nila i-handle? That is a challenge to those who are in the Anti-Terrorism Council, di ba? Na ang ganito bang expression of legitimate concerns and justice ay ituturing ba nila na protest or dissent na dapat i-criminalize?
I'm related to that, no? Kasi may framing naman doon sa ABS-CBN shutdown and other issues na may mga artists, specifically may mga artista nga din na supposedly is nakikisaw-saw daw. Anong role ba nila? Like, bakit sila pwede magsalita about what's happening? Kasi may ganyang comments na parang, sige, mag-entertain na lang kayo or something, parang gano'n.
Una po, yung gano'n na parang pagbabaliwala or pagsasabi sa kanila na entertainers lang kayo, that is very demeaning. That's a very demeaning way of seeing the work of artists, na parang pang-entertainment lang, gusto lang namin happy things, ganyan yung sabihin nyo, para maaliw kami. That's a very low and demeaning and disrespectful view of yung ginagawa na work ng artist. And yung ginagawa po ng work ng artist, malawak po yan. Mula dun sa nasa film, sa TV, hanggang sa mga cultural workers sa ibaba. yung nag-organizing sa communities. So yung ganun pong statement ng kung sino man yung mga nagsasabi at nagre-reinforce nun, una, nire-reflect na lang niya kung gaano kababa yung pagtingin nila sa gawain ng artists at cultural workers. Pangalawa, karapatan naman po ng mga artists na halimbawa ng mga artista at mga celebrity na sumausaw at makialam dahil citizens din sila. No? Being a celebrity does not exempt you from being concerned about the country and speaking out. Nakakatuwa nga po na marinig na yung mga celebrities and artists ay nagvo-voice out ng ganong opinions and very strong opinions at that. Kasi nga, maraming konsiderasyon yan. Kabuhayan nila is also dependent on a lot of things and a lot of factors. And speaking out could also have an impact on that. Pero, marami po napansin natin ng past 2 months, marami pong nagsalita, one after the other. Yung iba binuli, trinol online, pero nagtutuloy pa rin sa kanilang suporta. Kaya may karapatan po ang mga celebrities at yung mga artists sa mainstream film and TV na magsalita at maging mas matapang dahil bahagi po sila ng lipunan and artists are citizens who are concerned about the country.
Thank you, ma'am. Balik po tayo sa petition. Like, could you walk us through paano kayo nagdesisyon na mag-file, paano siya nabuo basically to hanggang doon sa filing na mismo?
Okay. Yung idea po for a legal petition, syempre this is parang naging general response to na maraming sectors po, di ba? Nung medyo clear na sa atin na magiging batas ito, many sectors from lawyers to human rights groups, church organizations were already mentioning in public na naghahanda ng legal petition. So, syempre, bilang bahagi ng different people and sectors na affected nito, talagang supportive tayo na oo nga dapat tayo mag-file. So, malaking bagay. So, NUJP, CAP, individuals and human rights organizations, sinag-usap-usap paano po ba ginagawa yung petition, yung legal petition, and how do we also file our own based on our own experiences of the past years. So, yung legal counsel is Attorney Evelyn Ursua, so she very generously agreed to represent yung media and artists for this petition. Sa bahagi po ng CAP, kasi dalawa tong organizations, so CAP and NUJP, sa part po namin, I think we sent out invitations to around at least 50 invitations. And I'm sure NUJP rin and the media groups also sent out. Then, we exchanged experiences. Ito po yung karanasan ng media workers. Ito yung karanasan din ng artists. Even before the terror law, which give us sufficient reason to say na may basis tayo in questioning the law, no? Because there was a precedent of attacks against media and artists. And malaki po yung role ni Attorney Ursua in also pointing and showing how legally mali yung or very dangerous din itong mga provisions which we are also pointing out. So it took several weeks. Ito we had very little time to file the petition. Just a matter of just a few weeks not to prepare everything. Kung ano yung existing documentation, ano yung mga position papers, pagkausap sa mga artists and media workers na who are willing to sign on as petitioners. Pero nagawa po to and na-file last July 23 sa Supreme Court. Pang 13th na petition po ito.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. Kay Ma'am Glenda po. Paano po yung decision, parang yung how you arrived at this decision, considering din na Rappler has other legal battles already?
Well, ironically, precisely because we have already many legal battles that this is just parang hindi na masyadong pinag-isipan because in-embrace na talaga namin na kailangan gawin ito at because offhand parang sabi nga natin 'di ba na naniniwala kasi ang Rappler na yung solidarity ng media ay napaka-imperative ngayon. So it's not just solidarity with fellow journalists but also artists and freedom advocates for that matter. So I think the reason na matatag ang Rappler ngayon dahil din doon, 'di ba? So ano na lang 'yon, ambag din namin at saka sa understanding namin na talagang unconstitutional yung batas. If you recall, 2 years ago, Rappler also initiated a petition before the Supreme Court to question the ban on Pia Renada, our reporter, and other provincial stringers of Rappler sa Malacanang. And nakakatuwa dahil 40 plus journalists outside Rappler and advocates and artists also joined that petition. So kita mo na nandun talaga yung hunger for solidarity and concrete action. I think what's guiding us really is to move to a second phase, which is outside protests and everything, is really to look for very concrete actionable items, to use the existing legal avenues to push back and to continue to check power. Because without action kasi kung parang kampante din ang nang-aabuso eh. So kailangan ipakita natin na within the legal avenues and that are available and legal options available to us, we could still push back. And that's if democracy is being cut a thousand cuts, we also need to rebuild it a thousand ways.
I-share ko rin po sana yung isang nakakatuwa po about the petition was there were media and artists from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao who signed on as co-petitioners. So from Visayas, many were based in Cebu. Tapos sa Mindanao, iba't ibang provinces po, no? So mostly media and filmmakers and writers from there. Yung naging karanasan nila in joining the petition is, I think, very very noteworthy po because it was they signed on as co-petitioners, meaning they sent documents and communicated and proceeded with that. Despite yung conditions po ng lockdown, especially sa Visayas. Sa Cebu, naka-quarantine sila at that time, but they found ways to send over the documents. Sa Mindanao po, many signed on pa rin as pumirma sa petition, despite yung climate of fear na nababanggit nila doon. May mga iba ayaw pa panotaryo pa nga, may mga ibang notaries na ayaw pa ngang pumirma or tulungan sila sa processing nito dahil takot, no? So I think kahanga-hanga po yung naging efforts ng petitioners, especially mula sa Visayas at Mindanao na tumulong dito. Overall, 37 po yung nakapirma. There were some na hindi naka-join at the last minute kasi hindi umabot yung documents. Pero all the same, nandun yung solidarity within and outside of the petition. On the day itself po, pang 13th po tayo na dun sa in that whole list of 26. And naalala ko po dun nung day itself, pumunta tayo sa Supreme Court. From the petitioners, there were 7 to 9 na nakapunta. Kasama po yung Rappler reporters, Sir Neil Doloricon, Dr. Jasmine Llana, NUJP, nandun po. Then, we were 13th in the queue. Tumapat sa number 13, pero hindi naman siguro mamalasin. No? There were several petitions filed that day, so talagang may pila outside the Supreme Court. And yung mga kasama po natin sa CAP PUP chapter, nag-hold ng isang performance. So there was a performance, um, there was a very brief performance piece shown in front of the Supreme Court. Pero just brief enough bago dumating yung police at baka mamaya hindi lang artwork yung i-confiscate, baka pati artist damputin na nila this time around. No? So by that after that we proceeded with the filing. Ayun.
Litaw po dun sa petition, no, yung vagueness of the law. Could we discuss that a little bit po? Ano yung danger nito? I mean, clearly, pero ano na rin natin?
Ay,
Okay,
ako pa. Ayan, so sorry, hindi ko pala po nabanggit kanina, no. Yung petition po, so it's a petition for certiorari and prohibition, of course seeking to like all of the petitions, yung hearing nito is gawing unconstitutional yung RA 114979. Yung basis po ng petition na to is 3 points. Una, very vague yung definition nito ng crimes, ng terror law of crimes considered as terrorism. Therefore, it violates yung clauses on due process ng 1987 Constitution. Tapos pangalawa, because of its vagueness and of the scope of what it tries to cover, it threatens yung mga freedom of speech, press, and association, which are all constitutionally guaranteed freedoms. Tapos, pangatlo, dahil kine-criminalize niya at pinipenalize niya yung all of this to a very detailed degree, bina-violate ng mga to yung due process natin of law. And because it really centers a lot of that power in the ATC or the Anti-Terrorism Council, which is mostly parang executive appointees. Nababiolate niya po yung doctrine of separation ng powers of government kasi sila na rin yung parang may power to determine who is a terrorist or not. So yun po yung parang gist of what the petition encompasses. So in artists in particular, nababanggit, concerned kami rin sa section 9 ng law, which is also mentioned there kasi nga yung section 9 kini-criminalize niya yung act of inciting to commit terrorism. So again, that one verb, inciting, it covers so many things, including artistic expression.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am Glenda, anything to add po on the
Yes, I think it's so broad and so vague because how do you determine intent and how do you determine when one is inciting to something? Diba? And again, it assumes and presumes that the bureaucracy has competent, ethical, professional people who in law enforcement who will be able to determine correctly what is intent.
Thank you, ma'am. At this point, I'd like to open the floor to questions from the attendees. If you have any, feel free to jump in at this point.
Ano kayang possible scenarios after this? Kasi yung worry ko, yung itong batas na to, parang extension sa ginagawa ng ina eh. Like, if you remember yung NTF-LCAT, it actually linked the protests in support of ABS-CBN to the insurgency. So parang overreach, sobrang overreach masyado eh. Nag-rally lang tayo sa ABS-CBN, terorista na tayo. So, anong tingin natin ito pag, let's say natalo tayo? What can we foresee? Yeah, in a regime under the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. Ano kayang mga natin?
Well, siguro increasingly we would expect a more militaristic and a more abusive environment as it is right now. And you also have to understand that this government kasi is under heavy criticism now in its handling of the pandemic. And the nature of leaders who are heavily criticized, they look for ghosts diba? They look for other enemies to blame. And I guess, unfortunately, that would be media, that would be the activists, that would be the artists, diba? And that would be the opposition and the critics. So increasingly, it is fair to anticipate that more and more ililink ang any legitimate protest and any legitimate action or even any expose or investigative story to a supposed plot to continue to undermine this government, supposedly, dahil, again, maski wala tong anti-terror law, doon naman papunta yung path na yun di ba? So there's that scenario. But on the other hand, I think what we're seeing as well, which is a bit of a silver lining, is a lot of Filipinos getting creative in expressing their dissent and their contrary opinion and their protest, di ba? So, ano to, in a way, may flashback to sa, matanda na ako pero may mga, it reminds me a lot of those days, no, na, the Mosquito Press was forced to do a lot of nuanced art, diba, or nuanced stories or nuanced posts just to hit at power and abuse. So there's that. So may ganun din creativity. Now, sa ng Supreme Court, as of last count, may 11 appointees sa Supreme Court si President Duterte. So that's majority. But I guess I'd like to believe na hindi pwedeng i-dismiss kaagad. Kasi ganito ka-unprecedented tong petitions na to, that you have two former Supreme Court justices as among those who are contesting this law. So parang ang hirap na sabihin lang ng Supreme Court, walang basihan yan. So we look forward to, I hope to a vigorous oral debates on it, and hopefully that will open the minds of the justices, and hopefully, why not? There's still hope that they'll kill it.
Opo, and yun nga, kailangan tuloy po yung laban di ba? Kasi yung long view of things, to have 26 at least and going petitions against a law, hindi ko po alam, baka may legal expert na pwedeng magkwento rin, pero parang hindi pa po ito nangyayari sa ating kasaysayan. And that's the legal petitions. Labas po yan sa lahat ng manifestos na ng different groups. Na kung susumahin lahat yan into one big manifesto, siguro aabot na ng 100,000 o kaya if not millions yung nagpapahayag na ayaw nila sa batas na yun. So kung hahayaan po ng Korte Suprema kung hahayaan nila na ituring itong legal or ibabasura nila ito, it will bring the battle to another stage po of outrage. Kasi gano'n na po kagarapal yun kung hahayaan po nila na hindi pakinggan ang lahat ng petitions na ito. And this is going to happen. Yung action na to is expected from them in this month, no? Kasi they're supposed to respond to since the first petition was filed. Kaya I think mahalaga po yung ma-master at mag-gather yung as much support outside of the courts for action on the petition and action that is for democracy and for justice. Tapos mahalaga rin po siguro yung nalalaman ng ibang tao sa labas ng bansa yung kahalagahan ng ginagawa natin dito, yung legal petition and the moves against the anti-terror law. Because there are many people around the world and many organizations and institutions who will also, who tulad nung nandito, ay very willing to stand for or to stand against the terror law at yung magiging impacts nito. No? Although worldwide, marami pong ganun. Mas nagiging authoritarian ang maraming gobyerno ngayon. Pero kaya mahalaga rin po na naabot din natin or nagkakaroon ng unity and solidarity among within the Philippines and with networks abroad po. And mahalaga rin kasi nga dahil nga na mas konti yung access ng media sa ngayon dahil sa pagsasara ng ABS-CBN, mahalaga rin po na tuloy-tuloy yung ways kung paano nalalaman ng ordinaryong tao yung kahalagahan nitong ng pag-stand against the terror law. And like in the days of the mosquito press, in the days where people, where yung dynamics of the press shifted under conditions of martial law, important pa rin talaga na malaman ng karaniwang tao kung gaano po katindi na yung atake sa ating karapatan. At yung katumbas po nun is, of course, pag hindi ito napangalagaan, yung collective safety natin and survival yung at stake.
Sinilip ko yung Facebook thread, no, yung comments dito sa webinar natin, no? And most of them are, well, hindi naman galit sa atin, pero a lot seem to be parang supportive of this law. And so parang masasabi ba natin na yung citizens medyo na-alarm or na-outrage dun sa batas when on Facebook at least, no? Parang supportive naman yung mga tao.
Well, alam naman natin na meron ding army of supporters ang government and the anti-protest movement on Facebook. So, while that could be legitimate, I think ang nakakalimutan na konteksto, yung tanong na, sinusuportahan ng tao tong anti-terror law? Ang Pilipino ngayon, naghihirap sa pandemic. Kaya nga, hindi nila maintindihan kung anong priority, di ba? Itong batas na to, pinasa at the height of the pandemic, ini-implement ang shutdown ng ABS. So ang tao ngayon walang energy to even support this law or to even dive into its details and specific provisions because they live day to day. And so yun yung perspective. Ano ang dapat ang inaatupag ng gobyerno at liderato ng Senado at ang Kamara ay yung pagtulong para pag makaraos tayo sa pandemic. Hindi ito. At ang pinag-uusapan natin ngayon, dapat hindi ito Dapat pinag-uusapan natin ngayon how we could make information more accessible to people, how we could be more accurate and probably even more investigative in the way we're looking into specific policies of this government vis-a-vis the pandemic. But precisely, we are limited by the constant harassment and the climate of fear, and therefore, hindi natin napagsisilbihan ang public. And even tayo mga journalists, kasi sa dami ng obstacles na binibigay sa atin para to prevent us from achieving our objective, which is really to be truth tellers and to speak truth to power.
On paper and initially, kapag narinig mo yung anti-terrorism law of 2020, syempre parang sa unang dinig parang, okay yun kasi di ba, sino bang ayaw dun sa who doesn't want yung anong tawag doon? Hindi ko mahanap yung exact phrase, pero who doesn't want to be against terrorism? Pero yun nga, yung details of how it imagines terrorism and how it defines, kung paano niya yung malawak na saklaw niya of what terrorism is at kung ano yung pamamaraan kung paano minumungkahi ng government to respond or criminalize that, dun po talaga yung delikado. Kaya nga dun sa language mismo natin, ewan ko, hindi ko na siya nagagamit na anti-terrorism law, parang automatically natawag ko siyang terror law. Kasi it's not anti-terrorism naman din in essence, but it's a law that's meant to enforce and to breed terror in society if it happens. Nasasabi po natin yan kasi may karanasan yung mga organizations natin of being red tagged, harassed for telling the truth, no? And for saying things which are inconvenient for those in power. Pero bahagi po lahat yun ng ng isang demokrasya. At pag-exercise ng ganong hindi lang kalayaan kung hindi responsibilidad para sa bilang mga citizens ng bansang ito. Kaya sana po yun yung isang bagay na maunawaan ng mas marami, na if you look at the details and how it proposes to conduct that anti-terrorism campaign, napakarami pong at stake.
Siguro na before we close, no, building up din kasi ng government na there are safeguards in place, and sabi rin ng Congress na if there is abuse, then we'd be quick to repeal the law. Siguro very quickly lang, Ma'am Glenda, how likely is that? Yung parang how reassuring are those statements?
Yes, well, those safeguards that are attached supposedly are not reassuring because, you know, we have safeguards as we speak. Outside the anti-terror law, even before the law was crafted, there are safeguards, right? I mean, the Constitution is a safeguard. The revised penal code is a safeguard. The conduct for public officials is a safeguard. You could use any of these laws or existing rules covering public officials to keep them professional, right? But these safeguards already have been abused. So what I'm saying is that those safeguards in that law are meaningless because realistically, safeguards as they are, even before the law was crafted, have been rendered meaningless by these abuses.
Tapos yung best safeguard rin po tingin ko is not passing the law in the first place. Not allowing it to pass, but they did, no? And hindi talaga po siya reassuring yung sinasabi na may safeguards, pangalagaan namin yung karapatan ninyo. Kasi ngayon pa lang, ramdam namin na nire-red tag kami, kung ano-ano yung mga pinopost sa social media ng mga ilang pages against CAP, for instance, or individuals associated with CAP. And so that's no reassurance at all. It's like para lang siyang pangpakalma or pangplacate doon sa mga nag-aalinlangan pa about where they stand. Pero for all who have directly experienced being attacked, that's not reassuring at all po. Ayun.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. At this point po, no, I'd like to give the floor to Sir Nona Espina, National Chairman of NUJP, for our closing to close the webinar.
Maraming salamat, Glenda. Thank you. Lisa.
Salamat din.
At, well, ang masasabi ko lang talaga, I have never encountered, I'm sure Glenda will agree with me, we have never encountered this level of antagonism from government. Tingnan mas masahol pa to sa naranasan natin kay Marcos. No? I mean, the number of deaths already and the continuing harassment, official harassment, na pararatangan ka na wala namang pruweba. So, and then this law, na parang blanket, parang ito na yung blanket na itatapon sa atin to stifle us, especially since lawyers have pointed out, this goes beyond the Constitution, itong batas na to. No? Pero ganun pa man, ako yung nananalig pa rin the lessons of history will bear us out. Hindi nagtatagal yung panunupil. Yung katotohanan ay lilitaw at lilitaw pa rin. Proven na to Nagganap na to nung panahon ni Marcos. I'm sure we will weather this somehow. At yun nga, madaling sabihin kumukontra lang kayo kasi may kasalanan kayo. Madali lang yun Pero I think experience will bear us out. It's also human nature, I think. Pag di ka tatamaan, di ka naman masyadong magre-reklamo. Kampante ka sa security, sa comfort zone mo. Pero yun nga, as Glenda pointed out, trabaho natin ay ilabas ang katotohanan. Ilabas ang katotohanan. And we owe it to our audiences, our people. Kasi yun naman talagang trabaho natin. So tingin ko, from what we've seen, I think we'll all agree na karamihan naman sa atin ay hindi naman papatinag. Patuloy lang yung laban. And seeing the challenge, the unprecedented challenge to this law, I think we're good. I think we're good. Hindi man tayo manalo siguro sa korte. Sigurado ako mananalo tayo sa ibang paraan. Kasi demokrasya at kalayaan na yung nakataya dito. So yan, maraming salamat at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Salamat.
Thank you.
Ay, maraming salamat.
Salamat po.
Okay. On that note, no, maraming salamat po sa mga dumalo. At maraming salamat sa pagsama sa amin sa discussion na ito. Ulitin ko lang po, hindi po tayo for terror. Ang may problema lang po tayo ay ang anti-terrorism law per se. Magandang araw po sa ating lahat. At maraming salamat.